Thank you all for coming today. We're going to talk about food safety. We'll start with, why is food safety important? Talk about some of the reasons why we're even talking about this today. Some common foodborne illnesses, common pathogens, the symptoms of foodborne illness, and then the main part, how to keep your food safe. When you're purchasing your food in the store, when you're storing it at home, when you're cooking it, and then some tips for even when you're eating out. And feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I'm happy to chat as we go along. So what is foodborne illness? It's basically an illness that comes from eating contaminated food. Each year, roughly 1 in 6 Americans, or 48 million people, get sick. 128,000 are hospitalized, and 3,000 die from foodborne illnesses and infections each year. It's important to know that the onset of symptoms really varies. If you eat a contaminated food, you may get sick pretty close to the time that you ate it, or it could be 24, 48, 72 hours after you ate that food before the symptoms happen. We'll talk a little more about the symptoms, but nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, those are the most common symptoms of foodborne illness. And why are we talking about it today? Well, older adults are at a great risk of foodborne illness, mostly because of compromised immune systems, other diseases you might have going on. As people age, they just become more susceptible to foodborne illnesses. And another important thing is that everybody is different. So someone might get sick after consuming a little bit of contaminated food, while somebody else might not get sick after eating the same amount of contaminated food. Everybody's body kind of fights these things off differently. So not everyone will get the same symptoms if they eat the same thing. So how do these bacteria or pathogens get into our food? Pathogens are microorganisms that cause disease, and when they enter the food supply, they can cause a foodborne illness. So they might be present on the food products when you purchase them. We've been seeing that a lot lately in the news. If you've been following the news, bagged salads, I think lately, McDonald's salads, I think lately, have been having some kind of foodborne illness associated with them. They can also be added to your food when you're preparing or cooking your food. If you're not doing it safely, those microorganisms can get in your food and make you sick. Not all microorganisms are bad. Some foods contain natural microorganisms that are good for you, like the bacteria in yogurt. That's a beneficial bacteria. But today we're going to be talking about the ones that can make you sick. And it's important to know that most cases of foodborne illness can be prevented by proper cooking, storage, and taking care of your food.
Could I just ask a question?
Yes, please.
Tell me what foodborne is. I get the idea that it's passed around in the air.
Well,
Describe it.
it's just, foodborne illness is just the illness related to the microorganisms in the food, and it can be put into the food. So, if contaminated water is used to rinse the food off, you're adding that microorganism to the food. It can also be if a food is sitting out too long, the natural bacteria in the food grow and can make you ill.
But what if we refreeze that? Because I had a thing with chicken.
Uh-huh.
And I was going to eat it, and I decided not to eat it. I left it out overnight. Ooh. Then I decided.
Out in the refrigerator or out on the counter?
I had it out on the counter.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did was I put it back in and I refreezed it. Then I ate it right after that. And I took it back out and I ate it. Nothing happened. I know. I don't think it was right, but that's what I did.
That is a good question. That is very risky. Freezing doesn't usually kill bacteria. Cooking to the proper temperature will kill it. Freezing doesn't. So you're lucky that you didn't get sick, because that's a very good possibility you could have gotten sick from that if you left it out and then just froze it. If food, we'll talk about how long it's okay to leave food out for.
I think I cooked it to the right temperature. It's supposed to be 165 or something.
Yep.
And I didn't do that either. I didn't even cook it the way they told me to cook it. I just threw it in the oven. I put it in the microwave. And I was supposed to. I cooked it. I was supposed to cook in the oven. I cooked it on the top.
It's okay to cook it on the top, but it still needs to get to that proper temperature. And you're right about the proper temperature. And we'll get into that when we get into the cooking part. But great questions. We should be able to cover all those questions in a little bit. Yeah.
Could you take questions after you talk? Because I really want to listen to you.
Okay. All right. So common symptoms, we already mentioned some of them. Common symptoms of foodborne illness are diarrhea, abdominal cramps, nausea, fever, vomiting. I'm not going to go too much into the common types of foodborne illnesses. We hear a lot about them. Most of them cause the same types of symptoms, and they're in different types of foods. So norovirus, that one is in shellfish or ready-to-eat foods that is infected by a infected person. E. coli can be found in undercooked beef, unpasteurized foods. Salmonella is in raw eggs, raw poultry. Listeria is unpasteurized milk, cheese. In Massachusetts, we looked up some stats, and salmonella continues to be a major foodborne illness, causing more than 1,000 cases in Massachusetts each year. So let's get on to kind of some of the ways that we can address these foodborne illnesses. How can you keep yourself safe when you're shopping and cooking? So starting with shopping, you want to read food labels and look at product dates. For the most part, foods that you buy in the store should be within date and safe, but it's still up to you as a consumer to be looking at the foods that you're purchasing. When you're putting the food in your cart, you want to keep raw meat, poultry, and fish separate from any ready-to-eat foods. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say ready-to-eat foods?
Cold cut?
So cold cuts are ready-to-eat food, yep, because you're not cooking them. So usually fruits, vegetables, if you're going to eat them raw, cold cuts, something that you're not going to cook or do any other kind of preparation to. When you're looking at canned goods, they should be in good condition. We can talk, I have some pictures of some canned goods that we'll talk about. Refrigerated food, when you're buying refrigerated food, you should make sure that it's cold. You should make sure that frozen food should be frozen. You don't want to buy anything that looks like it's out of temperature when you're purchasing it. And you never want to buy food that looks like it's displayed in an unsafe or unclean conditions. If you're looking at it and you're like, that doesn't look very good, it's best just to stay away from that. And, most of our stores around here are pretty good, but you never know. So I want to explain some of the food product dating. I'm sure everybody's seen on their food where it says expiration or sell by or use by. All of these things mean something different. So I'm going to just kind of explain what they all mean. I want to note that the manufacturers provide this dating on foods to help consumers and retailers decide when food is of best quality. So this is all about quality. Except for infant formula, dates are not an indicator of the product's safety and are not required by federal law. So foods don't have to have a date on them. Manufacturers put the dates on so that everybody knows when the food is best consumed by.
What about the stuff that comes in packets?
Like what?
I just bought in some things that I came across. Something like this here. It doesn't say anything about date.
So, like I said, foods don't have to have a date on them. So hold on.
Then there's this one, stuff like this. I don't want to eat stuff like this if it's
So let me just go through what some of these dates mean. So you see a food that says sell by. It means it's telling the store how long to display the product for sale. And you should buy the product before the date expires. So they want to get it off the shelf by a certain date so that they can bring in new product. Basically, they want to be rotating and make sure you get it at the best quality. Best if used by or best before is recommended for best flavor or quality. So that the manufacturer wants you to eat that food before that date because it's best by that date. So, it's not a purchase or a safety date. Manufacturers want you to eat the food when it's at the best quality so that you'll buy that food again. If you buy that food after it's been sitting out and it's a little bit stale or not quite at best quality, you might not buy it again. So they want you to use it at the best quality, right? Use by date is the last date recommended for the use of the product while at peak quality. Again, quality date. The date has been determined by the manufacturer of the product. They want you to use the product while it's still at best quality. And then there's something called closed or coded dates. They're not really dates, they're packing numbers for use for the manufacturer. So closed or coded dating might appear on shelf-stable products such as cans or boxes of food. Can I see this one again?
They didn't have anything on the outer or the inner.
So this one here, I'm really glad you brought this. We can pass it around, but it has some numbers and letters on it, and it really tells us as the consumer nothing. But if you called the company and read those numbers to the company, they would know when it was produced, what factory, what line it was produced on, what time. So it's a way for the company to be able to track that product. So if there was something wrong, they would know exactly where and when it came from. But it doesn't mean anything to us as a consumer.
So what good that was, I mean.
It doesn't, it doesn't. But there's nothing that we can do about that.
This is something you put on salads. Is that any good? I mean, the outer boxes didn't have
Yeah,
anything.
and it doesn't, it has some kind of closed or coded date on it. A strategy for that, unfortunately, I can't tell by looking at it when it was made or how old it is. But, well, you can open it up and see if you think those things don't usually go bad. If they smelled funny or something, you wouldn't want to eat it. But usually it's just the quality might not be as good. But a strategy for something like that when you're purchasing foods is if you get something and you can't see a date on it, you write with marker when you bring it home what date you brought it home. Then at least you know how long it's been in your cupboard. So you wouldn't want it to stay in your cupboard for years. So you can kind of track it on your own if it doesn't come with its own date on it. I found this little cartoon of a milk jug, and it says, best before May 9th, still pretty good by May 13th. And then, why is this still in your fridge on June 4th? They should be labeled like that, right? It's still pretty good, and then, a month later, you should be getting rid of it. Just a little joke about the dates and how the dates mean not much. And I always tell people, too, you see a lot of people will look in their fridge and see something that has yesterday's date on it. And they'll be like, oh, it's today, now it's bad, and throw it away. And, food doesn't overnight at midnight, it doesn't all of a sudden say, oh, I'm bad now. If you have stored your food properly and taken care of it, it can last beyond the date, which we'll talk about a little bit too. Because again, they're quality dates, not safety dates.
Well, meat and all that stuff, you keep that frozen, that's good forever, right?
If you keep food, if you store it properly, if you freeze it, it stays frozen, then it stays for quite a long time. So onto food storage. So if you're in the store and you buy some hot food, like you buy a rotisserie chicken, you either want to keep that hot or you want to cool it down immediately. You don't want it to sit out and stay kind of warm for a long time. Any cold foods you get, you want to keep them cold, keep them frozen. So bring them home, put it immediately in the fridge or in the freezer. You want to organize your fridge properly. So when you organize your fridge, there is a handout that I have that we'll go over 1 second. In your handouts, there is one about the fridge. You want to make sure that your raw meat, poultry, fish, any of those things that are very, kind of potentially hazardous are not sitting on top of ready-to-eat foods, aren't potentially leaking on any of your ready-to-eat foods. They should be by themselves and, maybe wrapped up in a plastic bag or something so no juices can get out. Pantry food should be closed and labeled. So like we said, if there's something that you see come in, it doesn't have a date and you're afraid you won't remember when you bought it, make sure you write down on it the date that you bought it. Have that, magic marker nearby when you bring your groceries in and write the date that you got it. Clean your pantry and refrigerator out on a regular basis. That is important. I was actually just, I was visiting somebody and I looked in their fridge and in their freezer and their pantry and found a lot of expired food. And like I said, it's okay past the date a little bit, but if there's something in your cupboard from 2015, you know, it's time to chuck it. First in, first out, make sure you're rotating. So if you're getting in more dry goods and putting it in your pantry, make sure you're really digging to the back and pulling that stuff forward so you don't have anything sitting in the back and you look at it one day and find it from 2015. So making sure that you're kind of rotating through product and getting rid of things that you're not actually using. You know, if it's still within date, you can donate it somewhere, give it to a friend who will use it, or throw it out. You know, just make sure you are not having a lot of food stored in your house that you're not eating. And toss any foods that are questionable. If you see something in your refrigerator, your pantry, or you know, somebody else's refrigerator or pantry, it's good to get it out of there if you think it's questionable. If you don't think it's safe, you don't think it's good, you know, when in doubt, throw it out. So here's the picture of the refrigerator I was talking about. It might be hard to see up here, but you do have it in your handouts. So when you're putting things in your refrigerator, the top, your cooked leftovers, your kind of ready to eat foods. Leftovers should be safe in your fridge for 3 to 4 days. Excuse me. If you have a thermometer in your refrigerator, that's a good idea to make sure that it stays at a good temperature. You want everything in your fridge to be 40 degrees or below. So setting your refrigerator so it keeps food at that temperature is important. Having a thermometer, it's a good visual way to see quickly if there's something wrong with your refrigerator. Especially, you know, in this heat right now, it's hard to keep things cold. If all of a sudden you see your temperature creeping up in your refrigerator, you know, you can take action on that before all the food in your house spoils. Like I already mentioned about the raw meat, you should make it so that it doesn't leak anywhere. Because you know, when you get it from the meat department in the store, they put that saran wrap on it, but sometimes those juices can kind of sneak out a little bit. So wrapping it in some kind of a plastic bag or something so those juices don't get on any of the rest of your food. The main compartment of your refrigerator, the big part, is the most temperature stable part. So you want to have your potentially hazardous foods in that part. So you want to keep your raw meat, your eggs, your milk, all of those things that are more vulnerable to temperature changes. You want them in the big part. And the doors, the temperature changes more frequently, so you don't want to put like your milk on the door, because then your milk might get warm and then cold and then warm and then cold, and it doesn't last as long. The drawers, usually they say it on there, for fruits and vegetables. And then your freezer should be set to 0 or below to keep your food nice and frozen. It's a freezer. All the food in there should be frozen solid. Any questions about refrigerators and how to kind of organize them? I have a couple of fun pictures of what is wrong with this refrigerator. This one, anyone have any ideas of what might be wrong with this refrigerator? Yes, you always want to keep your refrigerator doors closed.
The milk is on the door.
Yep, there's what we can assume is some kind of milk on the door. Same with the eggs. Raw eggs you don't want on the door. I know some refrigerators are set up that way. Food safety wise, it's better practice to keep them in the main compartment of the fridge.
A lot of the food's not wrapped. It's just,
Yep.
I'll eat it.
Exactly. You know, you got cut watermelon that's not wrapped, that chicken that's either raw or cooked.
What about that meat hamburger stuff that comes wrapped? Are you supposed to take all that wrap off? And what I do is I take the wrap off, and then I use the white bag, you know, that they usually come in, and put that in and hold it that way. You know what I'm talking about?
You take it out of what it comes in?
The plastic. The plastic.
Oh, you can keep the plastic on it and just,
See, my mother never did that. She used to always take the plastic off and put it in a white bag or wrap it in something different.
yeah, I mean, the issue you get to there is you're almost exposing yourself to cross-contamination, because if you're touching those raw burgers and wrapping it up and then you go touch something else.
I'm not touching the meat itself, I'm touching the container that it's in.
Oh, okay. If that's how you want to do it, I would keep it in what it comes in and wrap it up until you're ready to use it. You know, just pull it out when you're ready to use it. There's no real need to take it out of the original container until you're ready to use it.
Will we find in there about eggs? I don't want to use your time for something else, but about the life of eggs, is that in there? Because
Yes.
I don't know about the life of eggs.
Yes, so that's a good question. This handout that's in there, it's called the Food Keeper. The print is kind of small, and I apologize for that, but it lists, excuse me, it lists a lot of food products. It starts with refrigerated, and it talks about how long they're good in the refrigerator and how long they're good frozen. So it's a good reference to have if you have a question about something like eggs. Egg in shells are good for about 3 to 5 weeks in the refrigerator. So I'll answer your question quickly using the tool that I provided you. And I think in the little booklet too, there's also some references that tell you how long.
Best Buy, cotton.
Yep, but they'll last longer than the Best Buy too. Just Best Buy, again, quality. So you don't need to throw it out after that Best Buy date. You can still use it for, you know, usually a week or so after that, as long as, again, they stay at the right temperature, they stay nice and cold in your fridge. We won't spend too much time on this so we can keep going, but this is another example. I pulled this off the internet of a fridge. The first problem here is that it's overstuffed. If you have a fridge that is stuffed so much, the air can't circulate and keep things cold. So it almost insulates and keeps your food warm, which is the opposite of what you want in the refrigerator. So you don't want to stuff it so tightly. And you know, you have some raw burgers, it looks like, right next to some prepared salad that isn't covered up. Just to make sure those things are safe, you want them separated. You want the ready-to-eat salads, any ready-to-eat foods covered up so that nothing gets into them. Any other questions on that before we go by it? No.
I hope there's a big family there.
Yeah, it looks like they're having a party. I'm guessing they were having a party with all the salads and stuff. So another thing I wanted to talk about is what to look for in your cans and shelf-stable foods. What is safe and what is not safe in can dents. Because has anybody accidentally bought a dented can or found dented cans in their cupboards and you're not sure if it's good or not? Well, there are certain dents that are okay and certain dents that compromise the integrity of the can, which means it could make a microscopic hole letting air in. If air gets in, microorganisms can grow. So what you don't want is dents that are on the seam of the can. So that's the seam. It has a big dent on it. You don't want that. And you don't want any dents that are on the lid, where the lid meets the side of the can. Again, it can make microscopic holes in the can, letting air in.
You know, stores sell that, and they put it in the price down.
I know. That's why consumers need to be educated, because sometimes you do find them in the sale sections, or you know, sometimes the stores don't see them and they just end up on the shelves. And but those are the kind that you don't want. Not on the seam, not on the lid. You also don't want any dents that are real sharp, you know, that are almost pointy if you touch them. Again, that could have made a tiny hole in the can, but this one's on the lid and it's very sharp, so you wouldn't want that. And you can see how that's just kind of like crushed and sharp. Those are unsafe cans. You also don't want to eat out of any cans that have like pitting rust that you can't wipe off. Sometimes, you know, cans are stored places, they might get a little rust on them, and that's okay if you can wipe it off. But if it's pitted rust really into the can, it's not safe because it could have kind of permeated through the can. Any can that's bulging, you don't want, and anything that's leaking. So those are the things to stay away from. some of this stuff might be common sense, but it's good to look at it again. And
Or a certain date, I mean, you can't just keep that forever.
no, you don't want to keep canned food for too long, but canned food lasts for quite a while if it was canned properly and stored properly. Any other questions on cans? Another thing is if you open a can and anything flies out of it, that's not safe. That means there's some pressure built up there, probably some microorganisms growing. Questions before we move on to cooking? No? Okay. So when cooking, the 4 main things are clean, separate, cook, and chill. Those are the main ways that you will keep your food safe. So clean, by clean we mean wash your hands, wash your surfaces. Bacteria can spread throughout the kitchen and get onto cutting boards, utensils, countertops, food. So when you start cooking, wash your hands. When you change from cutting one thing to cutting something else, you should always wash your hands. If you're using raw food, wash your hands before you start doing ready-to-eat food. I found this statistic too. In a recent study, it was a 2014 study, 65% of consumers did not wash their hand before starting meal preparation. So anything that you have touched throughout the day, any doorknobs, if you walked into a restroom, whatever you touched, those germs are on your hands. You don't want to put that in your mouth, so it's important to always wash your hands before you start cooking. You want to rinse your produce. So rinsing fruits and vegetables under running water before you eat them. It'll take off any of that surface dust, any surface dirt or bacteria. And the CDC recommends that packaged fruit and vegetables labeled ready to eat or triple washed should not be washed. They say you can almost you have the potential to add more contamination if you wash them. They've already washed them and they're supposed to be as safe as they need to be. That's what I know. And not to use soap or bleach when you're washing fruits or vegetables. Because then you can almost get sick from the soap if you're putting soap on there if you don't wash it all off. Bleach, you don't want to be consuming bleach, so don't wash your fruits and veggies with bleach or soap.
Can you go back to that packaged fruits and vegetables? Is that like buy the grapes in a package?
Oh no, if they're labeled, usually I see it with salad where it says triple washed, that you don't need to wash those ones.
I wash all my fruits and vegetables.
I really don't think that that's a bad practice. I honestly don't quite know why they say you shouldn't wash the ones that say triple washed, but
No, not that. I would, if they say they've already washed.
yeah, you don't need to wash the ones that say triple washed, already washed, ready to go.
I buy them so I don't have to use the time to wash them.
Exactly. But any like apples, grapes, any berries, those kind of things, you always want to make sure you wash before you eat.
By washing, it's just run them under water, right?
Yeah, run them under water. That's what I mean by washing. Not soap, not bleach, just really running them under water. Separate. So when you're cooking, you don't want to cross-contaminate. And what I mean by that is you don't want any of the bacteria from the raw food to get onto your ready-to-eat food. So in this picture here, they're doing the right thing. They have a separate cutting board for their raw veggies and a separate cutting board for their raw meat. The only problem here is that they're very close together. So if some juices from that meat or bacteria from that meat could easily get on that veggies that I'm guessing are going to go for a salad or something. But you should have separate cutting boards, separate knives for your raw versus your ready-to-eat. In my house, I have one cutting board that I always use just for raw meat. And then my other cutting boards are for, other things. But that way I know none of my ready-to-eat vegetables or fruit are going to be on the same cutting board as my raw meat. If you don't have enough of those, make sure you wash your utensils and your cutting boards very well before you use it for something else. Soap, water, it's best to sanitize through it in the dishwasher where it gets really hot to really kill that bacteria. We're all using reusable grocery bags these days. We see a lot of those around, right? It's really important to wash them every once in a while, which not many of us do. But if you think about it, you're bringing your groceries home. You might have had some meat in there. Some of the juices might have come off. They just get really dirty. So it's good to wash them so no bacteria left in those bags gets on your next batch of ready-to-eat food. We've already talked about this when you're shopping and when you're bringing your food home from the grocery store. Make sure your raw meat, poultry, seafood are in a separate bag than your ready-to-eat foods. I'm not sure around here. Most of the grocery stores will ask you if you want your raw meat in a separate bag. You should always say yes. Sometimes they don't ask you and they throw it all in together, and that really bothers me. But you should have any of that raw stuff in a separate bag so that none of those juices, again, get on your ready-to-eat food. We talked about using separate cutting boards and utensils. And just a note about marinating. If you ever marinate your chicken, your beef, any of that stuff, you shouldn't use that marinade as a sauce on your food because your raw food has been sitting in it. If you want to use it on your food, make sure you heat it all the way up to boiling is what they recommend. Just because it's now it has any bacteria that was on that raw meat. So you don't want to put that on any of your cooked food. Any questions about that? All right, so step 3, cook. You want to make sure you cook your food to safe temperatures. Here's a list, and it's also in your book. So the most common one is chicken should go to 165 degrees for at least 15 seconds. Does anyone have a thermometer? Anybody use a meat thermometer? A couple people. So that's a great way to know. If you have a meat thermometer, you can temp it, make sure it's up to the proper temperature. It's a nice way to make sure you're not overcooking it too. So you know it's at the right temperature, you're safe, you don't need to cook it anymore. But otherwise, just make sure it's thoroughly cooked. If you don't have a meat thermometer, just make sure you're getting it all nice and hot. That's going to kill any bacteria that might be in the meat. So bacteria thrive between 41 degrees and 140 degrees. So anywhere in between that kind of room temperature is where bacteria thrive and will multiply and grow very quickly on your food. So that's why we're always saying keep your hot foods hot, so keep them at 140 or above, and keep your cold foods cold, so at 41 or lower. So you really don't want anything sitting in that, room temperature zone for too long. So this kind of illustrates how quickly bacteria can grow if you're not watching it. So this, 37 degrees Celsius, I think that's somewhere around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, the weather outside today. But if you leave something sitting on the counter, the bacteria, there's always some bacteria that's in food. Bacteria is everywhere. But within 1 hour, you're up to 800. 2 hours, 6,000, 50,000, 400,000. And then by 5 hours, you could have 3 million bacteria in that food. They grow very rapidly at those kind of warm room temperature temperatures. So the way you deal with that is you make sure that cold food is cold, hot food is hot. You don't want food sitting out for more than 2 hours. I'm not sure if it's in there, but you don't want your food sitting out for more than 2 hours. So if you're cooking something and you leave it on the stove for an hour, that's okay. Leave it out on the counter or whatever for an hour. That's okay, but make sure you get it into the fridge as soon as you can. You don't want things sitting out for more than 2 hours because that's when bacteria starts growing most rapidly.
But you kill it when you eat it. I mean, when you cook it, right?
Right, but it's not safe to keep it out for too long.
I left mine out overnight, so.
Yeah, that's not really recommended because it can, you can see how quickly the bacteria can grow. So you don't want to keep it out overnight. It's best to put it back in the refrigerator and then just pull it out when you need it.
It tastes like it's supposed to taste, didn't it?
So bacteria doesn't always have a taste. So you might not know. It's a good point because you might not know. It doesn't smell different, doesn't taste different, but if it was sitting out overnight, bacteria could have grown And you might not feel sick right now, but like I said, after some bacteria take 24, 48, 72 hours, all of a sudden you have a stomach ache. 2 days from now, it could have been something you ate yesterday, and you'll never connect those dots because one food 4 days ago doesn't always, you can't remember that, but it's best to do good food safety practices so you don't get sick. So into reheating. So you want to reheat your food thoroughly. So any leftovers, if you go out to eat and you have leftovers of something you cooked, you want to make sure it gets up to 165 degrees for at least 15 seconds. If you're not temping that, which most of us don't, you want to make sure you're heating the food thoroughly and that it's steaming hot. You don't want to just pull the food out and microwave it until it's warm enough to eat, because I know a lot of us do that. You just nuke it so it's enough so you can eat it. You really want to make it steaming hot to make sure you kill that bacteria before you eat it.
What about the food they say either cook or use a microwave? You should use a microwave, then you should cook it.
Oh, you can use a microwave. Any way that you cook your food thoroughly till it gets 165 degrees or it's steaming hot. You can use a microwave, you can use an oven, you can use the stovetop, as long as it's getting hot enough. So here's the chill part. So you want to refrigerate your food promptly, like I was saying, within 2 hours. Cold temperatures slow the growth of bacteria. It doesn't always kill it, so that's why you need to, if you're reheating, you want to reheat it to 165 for at least 15 seconds to kill it. And thawing food. When you thaw your food, if you have some frozen chicken you want to pull out and you want to, cook it, right? The safest way to thaw your food is in the refrigerator. So you pull it out a day ahead of time, let it sit in the refrigerator to defrost. It defrosts slowly, it never gets in that temperature danger zone. That's the best way, but you really have to think ahead for that, right? We don't always do that. So other ways you can do it, you can defrost your food in cold water. So if you have your chicken you pulled out, you put it in cold water, change that water every 30 minutes, and it'll slowly bring it up to temperature and thaw it out. If you're going to cook your food immediately, so if you're going to cook that chicken right away, it's frozen, you want to eat it now, you can thaw it in the microwave. Do your defrost setting in your microwave. But since that starts the cooking process and starts getting it hot, you want to cook it right away so that it's not kind of sitting there in that warm temperature that grows all the bacteria. You can also cook your food from frozen. So, like chicken nuggets or like fish sticks or something that you get frozen, you can put it in the oven and it thaws as it's cooking. It usually takes longer to cook it that way.
You're talking about the freezer to the ice box, like the regular.
Yeah, you can, from the freezer right to the oven, something like that. You can do that. It just takes a little bit longer to cook, and that's fine too. But it's best not to thaw it at room temperature. Again, it sits at room temperature where it's too warm. Also, if it sits on your counter, those juices can kind of get everywhere and cross-contaminate.
Move it from the freezer to the bottom of the refrigerator.
Yep, you can pull it right from the freezer to the refrigerator. That's the best way to do it. That's the safest way. Any other questions on thawing your food?
I have a question, because I always considered, because I don't eat a lot of meat and stuff, but I don't treat vegetables the way I treat all of this kind of food.
Yeah, this is mostly for like meat type foods. Pulling vegetables are different because they don't have the bacteria in them that meat usually does. That's a good question. I didn't specify that. You don't need to worry about thawing your vegetables the same way. And when you're eating out, they should be cooking your food thoroughly, but it's still, as a consumer, it's still important for you to make sure that the food they give you is cooked all the way through. If you think it's raw, make sure you have it cooked. Avoid foods that are served raw or undercooked. And if you bring food home, be sure it's refrigerated promptly. So don't leave it out for more than 2 hours. If you have a takeaway bag, just make sure you put it in your fridge so it'll cool down and stay cold. Any questions?
Well, I'm just gonna go back to the vegetable. I left some string beans out overnight,
Uh-huh.
and they were cooked, and I just forgot to put them in, but I ate them the next day. Would you have eaten them the next day?
Not if they were cooked. Not if you've cooked them. Like raw ones are usually okay. But if you cook them, then you've added moisture to them. You've got them cooking. It's kind of sitting in the temperature danger zone. I would have tossed them.
It won't happen again.
But now we know, right? Now we know. Now we've known. I have a story. Somebody told me, I did one of these talks somewhere else, and one woman told me about a Thanksgiving she used to have at her mother-in-law's house. They would have the big turkey. They'd let the turkey sit out. You know, everybody would eat their turkey dinner, and then they'd let it sit out. And then, so the turkey wouldn't dry out, they would put a damp like a damp dishcloth on the turkey, let it sit out all night long. And she's telling me the story, and I'm like, oh my God, there's so many things wrong with this. You all could have gotten so sick. I'm like, did you ever feel sick? And she's like, well, yeah, but we just thought it was from eating too much. Like we all had that stomach ache. We thought it was from eating too much. And I was like, oh, that could have been from eating a turkey that was sitting out and you kept the moisture. Like that's just ripe for, they couldn't have found a better way to like grow bacteria than to put a moist towel on something sitting out at room temperature. So that was a good story. So I was like, yeah, she doesn't do that anymore. And I think she said she got wise to it and started like putting the turkey away for the mother-in-law. I was like, you don't have to do it. And she's like, no, I'll do it for you. I'll help and put it away. Try to keep everybody safe.
I was working at, in the summer at a camp, sort of, it wasn't really outdoor camp, but we had a freezer.
And somebody opened the freezer and you could see this juice dripping. The refrigerator had corked. So we called, I don't know whether we called the frozen department or something, I don't know. And they said with the beef, you could refreeze it if it was not soft. But with the chicken, you could cook it right away and then freeze it, but do not put chicken that's soft in the freezer.
Well, that's now it's kind of any food that had been frozen. So any meat product that was frozen, you don't want to thaw it and refreeze it. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing it up. You don't want to thaw it and refreeze it. You know, for quality of the products, it doesn't come out as good once you thaw and freeze and thaw and freeze. But also safety-wise, you're kind of letting all these possibilities for bacteria to grow, because as we said, freezing doesn't kill the bacteria. So whether chicken or beef, I would say any meat product, once it's been frozen and thawed, you should cook it. You can freeze it after you cook it, but you don't want to thaw and freeze the raw product.
Beef, they said if it's not soft, which that did not differ, but we had tons of chicken. The kids had chicken every single day, breakfast and dinner and supper, because they said cook it right away.
If it hadn't gone into the temperature danger zone for too long, you could cook it
It wasn't like the refrigerator was open and closed or what. It was closed.
But yeah, something broke in there, yeah.
Something just happened, so.
See, when I usually go out and buy hamburger, right? And I buy it for myself, so there's a lot left over after I make a burger. So I throw it back in to keep it freezer because it'll go bad. Yeah, I mean, it's better to have it frozen than if you put it down on the bottom without freezing it at all, it'll start to smell and everything. Yeah, you can eat it, but after you freeze it and refreeze it again, you can eat it.
So what I would recommend in that situation is when you come home with the beef, separate it into like burgers or into bags and put them all in the freezer, and then you can pull out what you need one at a time instead of thawing it all, freezing it, thawing it all, freezing it. You know, just do it at that one time, break it into their bags, put it in the freezer.
I'm not talking about the ones that are already made. I'm talking
You can
about
get,
the
yeah. But you can, take a handful of that, throw it in a Ziploc baggie, put it in the freezer. Enough for one burger if you're just gonna do one burger, and then thaw one at a time. Leave the rest of it nice and frozen in the freezer.
What do you think of washing chicken with salt or let it stay in with salt?
So
Rinse it
I don't recommend rinsing chicken. There's no need for it, and really what the potential harm is if you're rinsing that chicken and there's salmonella on the chicken, you could be kind of spraying that around your kitchen. You don't need to cook it, or you don't need to wash it, but you're talking about putting it in water with salt, like brining it.
Yes.
That's fine. Usually I would do that in the fridge though. Like if you're gonna brine it, let it sit. Yeah, let it sit in the fridge in the brine so it's staying cold, but it's still in the brine. But I wouldn't wash the chicken.
We've been doing that for years.
I know.
We all have survived.
So one thing to see, I hear it a lot, like, oh, I've been doing this forever and I'm fine. And, I've pointed out first that, you may have gotten sick from something you ate 4 days ago and not have realized. But the other thing is our food and our food system has changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. So something that may not have made you sick before could now, just because of the changes in the food system and how, the chicken's grown over here and then it's processed over here and it's sent over here. And there's so much more in our food system that can make you ill. And also, getting older, your body might react differently to some of these pathogens that you might have been able to fight off more easily when you were younger. You may not be able to fight them off quite as easily as you age, or if you're ill from something else. So that's why food safety is something we should be paying attention to now. Even though it may not have made you sick in the past, it could now for a multitude of reasons.
Would a true generalization be that you have to be more careful in summer than in winter?
Potentially. If your house temperature stays about the same all year round, if you have heat and air conditioning, then it's not any real difference. But if you don't have air conditioning and your kitchen is warmer and in the summer, you should definitely be more careful in the summer because your house temperature is warmer. It's warmer if food is sitting out. Your refrigerator might have more trouble staying cold if you're opening it and it's like 90 out. So you should be paying a little more attention in the summer. Yeah.
Some of this, as you said, is, general knowledge. But not that I'm independently wealthy, but I eat out daily. And I noticed that some people that I know do not store their bread in the refrigerator. I don't even buy bread, but when I used to buy bread, I used to put it in the refrigerator. And potatoes and onions, they don't refrigerate. I've always refrigerated, and I don't understand.
So potatoes, onion, there's fruits and vegetables don't have to be refrigerated unless they've been like cut. So whole potatoes, whole onions, they don't have to be refrigerated. Bread doesn't have to be refrigerated, but in this heat and stuff, the mold, like bread might mold sooner because of the heat. So those are things that don't have to be refrigerated. I personally put my bread in the fridge because if it sits out, it can mold faster. Potatoes, they can, as long as it's a cool, dry place, potatoes usually last for a long time. But in this heat, they might not. So there's nothing unsafe about either of those things. I think it's preference. Some people don't put tomatoes in the refrigerator. Yeah, because it makes them kind of mealy sometimes. Again, as long as they're whole and haven't been cut, then it's not like a food safety issue.
And my mother didn't.
And your mother didn't.
Who said oranges should not be put in the refrigerator?
Again, that's fine as long as they're not cut if they're whole oranges. I guess a generalization there is if it grows outside and usually sits outside, it's fine unless once you cut it, you've exposed the inside to air and potential pathogens, so you should put it in the fridge.
What about apples? Is it better to refrigerate them than keep them out?
I think, again, that's preference. If anything that sits out in the warm might go bad quicker, so you might prolong the life by putting them in the fridge, but if you like them warm on the counter, then as long as they're not cut, then you're fine, whichever way you like to do it. Yeah.
And I primarily fish when I go out to eat a lot, but sometimes I buy fish. And I was gonna buy fish, and I put a cooler in my car and some cool packs, but I was gonna do it yesterday, and I just forgot the cooler and not the fish. I didn't buy the fish yesterday, but I left it. But usually, if I'm gonna buy something perishable, I'll take the cooler with me and the cool packs.
Yeah, that's a really good plan, is if you know that you're gonna buy cold stuff and your car is gonna be really hot, or you might have a long drive, it'd be really good to put it in a cooler or something that will keep it cold. In general, if you're just going from the market back home, it's not gonna be a big deal if it gets a little bit warm. So if you don't have it, then it's not huge, but I think it's a really good idea, so you can make sure you're keeping it cold.
They
And
used to have those in the store when you bought it. You bought ice cream, they had a cold pack. They used to pack it. They don't have that anymore.
Oh, I never knew that.
You got a cold pack, put,
you can buy one, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I mean, when you went to the store,
They would do it for you?
yeah, they have these little bags,
Wow.
cold, but they don't.
Yeah.
They don't do it.
I've never
anymore.
seen that.
A personal question. Do
Yeah.
you ever put bananas in the refrigerator?
I don't.
They last forever. Once they start to go, you can.
They do. You can. They turn brown, so they're not.
Okay, but they don't get mushy all, well,
Yeah.
depends how much.
They don't. They're just not as appetizing to some people because they turn brown. I keep them out, and if I don't eat them, then I cut them up. Well, I cut them up and put them in the freezer, and we use them in like smoothies or something. So I make sure they use them.
Banana bread.
Yeah.
Put it in there.
Not, if I'm gonna eat it, I don't put it in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
But with those things, I have a baggie that I put everything that's going into the refrigerator or the freezer. And I give the fellow that first, and that's what I put on my counter first. So he'll put those in there. And then when I put it in the car, I take that bag and put it beside me.
Oh, down where the air conditioning is, so it's cooler. Yeah, because then the trunk is always warmer. So if you put it down there, it'll stay cooler longer. Yeah, that's a good idea too. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, I do have one. If I'm cooking, I usually cook more than I need. I'm only one man now, but if I have cooked a vegetable, something, and I take out what I want to eat, I put the other stuff in the dish that's going to go covered and everything in the refrigerator. But I don't put it in when it's really piping hot. I just wait a while. Is it a difference between?
So
It's not out a long time.
that's a good question too. So you can. People ask me this question a lot, and if it's a big quantity of something, you don't want to put it in a deep container piping hot, because that's all it's going to do is heat up your refrigerator. A little cup of something, hot or cold, it's not going to heat your refrigerator up. But if you want to let it cool for a little bit, that's okay. I just wouldn't, if it's hot, I wouldn't put a lid on it and put it in the fridge. I'd let it cool either out or in the fridge with the lid off so it cooled down. Because people ask me that a lot about like rotisserie chickens, whether you should keep them closed up and put them in the fridge or what. And I would take the top off. Personally at home, I take the top off and let it cool for a little bit, and then I put it in with the top off to make sure it gets nice and cold. So I think either way you want to do that, as long as you're not heating up your refrigerator. You can let it cool for a little bit, as long as it's not out for more than 2 hours.
It wouldn't even be that long, but I just don't know.
Yeah, if it's piping hot, let it cool down for a little bit. That's fine. All right. Well,
If I had, like, I'm serving a meal or something, and I have mayonnaise that I put out, or mustard or something, in a smaller container, I throw that away afterwards.
yeah. If it's been, if you put like little condiments out in cups or something, and people have used them, I would definitely toss them. Even if it's, they put their knife in there or something, because they might have used their knife for something else and they put it in there, it's best just to toss that and then, do it again later. Yeah, that's a good point too.
I'm looking forward to reading all the literature. Great. No, that's really
All right, well, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.